Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with legal news involving Donald Trump. The president-elect has failed to convince a judge to set aside his conviction in the New York hush money case on presidential immunity grounds. New York State Justice Juan Merchan rejected Trump's argument the trial was tainted by testimony and other evidence that should not have been allowed under a July Supreme Court decision granting presidents broad immunity from criminal charges. Bob Van Voris is a legal reporter for Bloomberg News.
Judge Merchan ruled that Trump had failed to preserve most of the objections to the evidence that he objected to, meaning that the judge is unable to rule on it because he didn't, object at the time. He ruled also that even if he had preserved those objections, they would not fall within the immunity.
Bloomberg's Bob Van Voris says it's unclear if the case will proceed to sentencing as the president-elect continues to challenge the verdict. In May, a Manhattan jury found Trump guilty of falsifying business records to conceal a $130,000 payment to former adult film actress Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election.
Meanwhile, Nathan, Trump spoke to reporters for over an hour at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida club, covering a wide range of topics. He says Ukraine needs to reach a deal to end the Russian invasion.
Got to be a deal. No, got to be a deal. Too many people being killed. That is a war that's too many people. Got to make a deal. And Putin has to make a deal. What deal?
Hours after Trump spoke, Ukraine claimed responsibility for the assassination of the head of Russia's radiological, chemical, and biological defense troops in a bomb explosion in Moscow.
Another topic the reporters brought up, Karen, was drones. White House officials are still trying to ease concerns about the thousands of sightings in New Jersey and other parts of the Northeast. National Security spokesman John Kirby says there's no reason for alarm.
Our assessment at this stage is that the activity represents commercial, hobbyist, law enforcement drones, all operating legally and lawfully, and or civilian aviation aircraft.
White House spokesman John Kirby says the FBI followed up on 100 tips out of the more than 5,000 it's received in recent weeks. President-elect Trump says he thinks the White House knows more than it's saying.
They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense.
The president-elect says he doesn't think it's the enemy, but he suggested his New Jersey golf course could be a target, saying they're flying very close to Bedminster.
Well, Nathan, President-elect Trump also discussed immigration at his Mar-a-Lago news conference. He threatened legal action against the Biden administration for selling unused materials from his border wall with Mexico.
We're going to have to rebuild it, and it'll cost double what it cost years ago, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars.
The president-elect was also asked if he's had preliminary talks with Venezuela and other countries about his promised mass deportation of millions of immigrants. Trump said, quote, they'll take them back. Bloomberg News has learned Trump's transition team has begun back-channel talks with Mexico and El Salvador about taking in undocumented migrants. Advisors involved in the effort include incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller.
Karen, President-elect Trump also talked about his pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there. He's going to be very much less radical. But there are problems. I mean, we don't do as well as a lot of other nations.
The president-elect spoke as Kennedy kicked off meetings with Senate Republicans ahead of his confirmation hearings. Senator Mark Wayne Mullin said after their meeting he plans to vote yes and that Kennedy supports the polio vaccine, in his words, 100%. Kennedy also met with Florida Senator Rick Scott and has more meetings this week with Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and Senate Finance Chairman Mike Crapo.
Nathan, the CEO of TikTok, met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago on Monday, just weeks before the popular video app is expected to be banned in the U.S. over national security concerns. The private meeting came just hours after Trump suggested he'd somehow try to reverse the ban to save TikTok, which he used to reach young voters on the campaign trail.
Let's turn back to markets now, Karen, as we watch futures move lower a day after the NASDAQ 100 closed at an all-time high. The moves come a day before the final Fed rate decision of the year. Veronica Willis is a global investment strategist at Wells Fargo Investment Institute.
I think we're going to move from the market being excited about an easier Fed to refocusing on excitement around economic growth. So I think through the early part of 2025, the Fed may still be able to cut rates, but as we see growth strengthen and as we see inflation maybe moving a little bit higher, we're probably not going to be able to see the Fed continuing to cut rates.
Wells Fargo Investment Institute's Veronica Willis says the Fed is widely expected to cut rates a quarter percentage point tomorrow. Stick with Bloomberg for full Fed coverage on a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed Decides. That's tomorrow, 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and television.
Well, Nathan, look for 10-year Treasury yields to climb under President Trump. That's the word from T. Rowe Price. In fact, the firm says yields may climb to 6% for the first time in more than 2 decades as U.S. fiscal woes worsen and Trump's policies help keep inflation elevated. The 10-year Treasury yield, which influences the pricing of everything from corporate debt to mortgages, is currently trading at 4.42%.
When it comes to interest rates overseas, Karen, traders see fewer cuts by the Bank of England. That's after data showed U.K. wages rose more than forecast in the 3 months through October. The implied chance of a third quarter percentage point cut from the BOE in 2025 fell below 50%. That's down from 90% ahead of the report.
And staying in Europe here, Nathan, the Bank of France has cut its domestic growth outlook just days after President Emmanuel Macron named the country's 4th prime minister in a year. We get more from Bloomberg senior editor Phil Serafino.
It's not great news. A growing economy can really help France with a lot of its budget problems, and growth has just not been great for a long time, and it's going in the wrong direction. The head of the central bank, François Villeroy de Gallo, is out doing media now to talk about this report, and he's got a pretty strong message also, which is that this political discord is really a problem. There was a quote he said, "It risks gradual economic decline," which is not something you want to hear.
And Bloomberg's Phil Serafino says the French central bank now expects only a 0.9% expansion in 2025 instead of 1.2% it predicted in September. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. Another deadly school shooting. A 15-year-old student killed a teacher and another teenager with a handgun Monday at a Christian school in Wisconsin. Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes.
She was a student at the school, and evidence suggests she died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
The female student also wounded 6 others at a study hall at the Abundant Life Christian School, including 2 students who were in critical condition. In Canada, the Prime Minister there, Justin Trudeau's administration, has been thrown into crisis. His trusted deputy, the Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, published a withering resignation letter. It left Trudeau weakened at the worst possible time. Trudeau and his cabinet have been struggling for weeks to show a united front against Donald Trump's threat to slap 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. The president-elect giving some hope to New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Donald Trump was asked if he'd pardon Adams, who's been indicted on federal corruption charges.
Yeah, I would certainly look at it.
On Bloomberg TV yesterday, Adams painted himself as a victim.
President Biden stated that his Justice Department has been politicized. President Trump said that. I said that.
Adams said he's moving forward and committed to running for re-election. We'll have more of his interview in a few minutes. A major earthquake in Vanuatu appears to have damaged buildings in the Pacific island nation. The 7.3 magnitude quake struck about 19 miles from Vanuatu's capital. The U.S. Embassy has sustained considerable damage. It's closed until further notice. The Y-shaped archipelago in the South Pacific is home to about 330,000 people. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, John, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. It's been quite a season in Minnesota. Vikings went just 7-10 last year, drafted a new quarterback. J.J. McCarthy got hurt, so the Vikes turned to the journeyman, Sam Darnold, and he's been terrific. Hosting Chicago, Darnold and the Vikings struck in the first quarter.
Play action from Darnold. End zone. Touchdown, Jefferson. Shout out to Randy Moss after the touchdown. from Justin Jefferson, his 8th of the year.
ESPN The Call, Randy Moss, the former Vikings great, just revealed he has cancer. Minnesota went on to win 30-12, now 12-2 with 7 wins in a row. And with Detroit's loss Sunday, there's a tie for first in the NFC North. Atlanta won in Las Vegas 15-9. Falcons end a 4-game losing streak. They're 1 game out in the NFC South. The Raiders are 2-12. They're tied with the Giants for the NFL's worst record. Kansas City has the best at 13-1. Hosting Houston Saturday, may not have Patrick Mahomes, has a mild high ankle sprain. There's no reason to think he won't be fine for the playoffs. Blowout at Barclays. Cleveland's got the NBA's best record, 23-4. Cavs up by 20 in the first quarter. They beat the Nets 130-101. In Vegas tonight, it's Milwaukee and Oklahoma City in the in-season NBA Cup final. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. And Bloomberg Daybreak brought to you by Audi. Visit your tri-state Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model you've always wanted.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Donald Trump might not be able to leave his legal issues fully behind him when he returns to the White House next month. The New York judge who's been overseeing the president-elect's hush money case is leaving his felony convictions intact, though it's not clear if the incoming president's going to have to face sentencing over this. For more and on all the political headlines this morning, we are joined by Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries. Bill, good morning. So where does this decision leave the case now for President-elect Trump?
Well, good morning, Nathan. I mean, it does leave it in still a bit of a limbo. I mean, Judge Merchan here in New York saying that basically the immunity argument that Donald Trump and his lawyers have put forward in this case really doesn't apply to this situation. I mean, this is, you have to remember back now, it's almost 8 years. This goes back to the Stormy Daniels case and the 2016 election campaign. Merchan basically saying none of the rulings from the Supreme Court that deal with Donald Trump's immunity as president have any bearing here. But the reality is that the sentencing is probably not going to happen, or is going to be a lot of questions about whether he could face even a fine at this point, which was kind of the most likely scenario. So that's something that's still going to play out, but it is a legal setback for the president. It shows that there are some limits to that immunity ruling that we got earlier this year.
Well, it doesn't seem like that legal cloud was much of an impact for the president-elect as he held this wide-ranging news conference at Mar-a-Lago yesterday. He really seemed to relish the president-in-waiting role.
Oh, absolutely. I was putting down a list of everything he hit in that. Besides, there's TikTok and return to office, investments in the U.S., pardons potentially for the New York mayor, the Iowa pollster going after that. I mean, it was drones in New Jersey. I mean, you can almost throw a dart at a board and you'll hit an issue that he raised there. But particularly of interest was Ukraine and how his view that needs to come to an end very quickly was very dismissive of the idea that the U.S. has allowed Ukraine to hit targets deep within Russia. And he said there's got to be a deal soon.
Well, you have to wonder, though, whether there's going to be a deal with this latest development just this morning that Ukraine's claiming responsibility for the assassination of a top Russian general in Moscow, Bill.
Yeah, we're looking at still all just breaking in the last hour or so. Ukraine saying that it was behind the killing of this lieutenant general who helped oversee Russia's radiological, chemical, and biological defense forces in an explosion in Moscow early. We don't know what the ramifications of that are going to be, how Putin might respond, but it's certainly a sign that there, continues to be ways for both sides to escalate in this conflict.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, Houston and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.